Let's go ahead one. Okay, folks, I think we're up and running. Yeah, so we just went over the perfect bikini body. Can we all really have it? Love and gaze as an anti-depressive beauty ideal in the last episode. Look at that good old download number there, 340. Biscuit conditionals and prohibited then. Ooh, what's a biscuit conditional? There's generally two kinds of indicative conditionals that do not contain conditional then. There are hypothetical conditionals. If Mary has done the groceries, there is beer in the fridge. I mean, couldn't you just throw the then in there? And then there are biscuit conditionals. I like biscuits, they're tasty. If you are thirsty, there is beer in the fridge. Why is it called a biscuit? Thus broad consensus, we cannot find an analogous distinction between hypothetical and biscuit conditionals within indicative conditionals that do feature then. Well, let's see if this is available, because I like biscuits. Come on, shark faces. You know, I'm going to just have to go to the hub of science and see if I can find it there. I will consider it. If I do not see anything else, I will go back to biscuits, since I like biscuits. A paradox of matter and form. In the face of puzzles of material constitution, some philosophers have been moved to posit a distinction between an object's matter and its form. Hylomorphism. I mean, yes, some people have thought of the hylomorphic homuncular people too. Lewis's definition of personhood debugged. Look at all that big old number there. Let's go look at paradox of matter and form first. If this is available, maybe I'll do that. MeganFairchild.com. Thank you, Maegan Fairchild. Okay. Looks good. Well, drinking beer. Cheers. In the face of the puzzles of material constitution, some philosophers have been moved to posit a distinction between an obvious matter and its form. A familiar difficulty for contemporary hylomorphism is to say which properties are eligible as forms. For example, it seems that it would be intolerably arbitrary to say that being statue-shaped is embodied by some material object, but that other complex-shaped properties aren't. So, wait. It would be entirely arbitrary to say that being statue-shaped is embodied by some material arbitrary, but that other complex-shaped bodies aren't. Yeah, well, is it a statue or isn't it? Antiarbitrariness concerns lead quickly to a plenitudinous ontology. The usual complaint is that the superabundance of material objects is too extraordinary to accept, but I want to raise a different worry. I argue that the most natural way of developing this picture is already inconsistent. I show that a simple version of plenitudinous hylomorphism is subject to a Russellian argument, but argue that we cannot treat the problem straightforwardly as an instance of Russell's paradox of sets. So it's not self-membered? It is self-membered? We will find out. In the face of the puzzles of material constitution, some philosophers have been moved to posit a distinction between an object's matter and its form. Okay, so we've got a whole bunch of people here at the bottom that are contemporary Aristotelian about this sort of thing. The puzzles are familiar. It seems that Leibniz's law, the statue must be distinct from the lump of clay that makes it up, because the lump can survive squashing while the statue cannot. I do like squashing things too. My favorite knit hat must be distinct from its yarn, because the yarn can't survive unraveling, but the hat sadly cannot. Well, I hope your hat did not unravel. The matter that makes up the oak tree outside my window is distinct from the tree itself, but the matter can survive being fashioned into a table after the tree has been destroyed. On the other hand, it is hard to see how these things could differ from each other when they appear so intimately related. After all, the statue and the lump seem to share their material parts, occupy the same regions, and have many of their non-modal properties in common, and so on. Hylomorphism purports to address both sides of this puzzle. Very informally, according to hylomorphists, objects both have matter, the chunky stuff that makes them up, and embody forms, the non-chunky component that somehow unifies, molds, or structures their material parts. Thus, although the statue and the lump share their matter, the statue, unlike the lump, embodies the property of being statue-shaped. This is meant to allow us to accommodate the application of Leibniz's law, while at the same time making the distinction between the statue and the lump somewhat less mysterious. Although their difference in form explains their different modal properties, they nonetheless are made of all the same chunky stuff, so it is no wonder that they are so intimately related. Although hylomorphists agree that there is a difference between merely instantiating a property as the lump does and having its form as the statue does, they differ on the details. Some hylomorphists say that the properties are formal parts of the object that embody them, others say that they are non-mereological constituents of the objects, and still others say that forms are instead some kind of non-constituent constraints on the object. All these are important differences. My plan here is not to focus on the details of any particular account. I'm instead interested in the minimal version of hylomorphism that emerges when we take seriously the difficulty of saying which properties are eligible as forms, and thus which embodiments there are. Okay, so any embodiment at this point is the thing, and you're going to say the embodiment that is not an embodiment runs you into Russell-style problems. For a theory to be viable as a response to the puzzles of material constitution, it must have a permissive enough conception of forms to generate all of the objects we ordinarily recognize. When some matter instantiates the property of being statue-shaped, I don't know if there is a property of being statue-shaped. I mean, there are particular statues that have those particular shapes, but being statue-shaped seems like a very strange thing. It's like this is not a Duchamp's fountain. It's like, well, or is not a pipe. I mean, they are urinal shaped and also maybe statue shaped, or was it his bicycle is like the wheel thing on the stool? I mean, that's a statue of some sort, but being statue shaped seems to be he specifically sort of blew that up, that there is no statue shaped thing, there is no like fountain shaped thing, because he put a urinal there that I fear that Duchamp has got a good counterexample to this. But moving on, we want to account to guarantee that there is a further object, a statue, which embodies that property. Yeah, particular statue shaped. The difference is finding some principled stopping point. It seems that it would be intolerably arbitrary to say that being statue-shaped is eligible as a form, but that a range of other complex-shaped properties aren't. To avoid arbitrariness, it seems we should avoid posing any restriction on forms, which will in turn lead us to an abundant ontology of embodiments. Okay, thank you, Duchamp. One standard complaint about this picture is that the superabundance of material objects is too extraordinary to accept. So everything's stacked, even like weird things. I want to raise a different and prior worry that the most natural and attractive way of developing this rough picture, which I will call simple hylomorphism, is already inconsistent. Simple hylomorphism is subject to problems analogous to Russell's paradox. I show that on pain of contradiction, we have to surrender something from the simple account. However, it isn't immediately obvious what we should give up. Despite the close parallels, we cannot treat the problem straightforwardly as an instance of Russell's paradox. standard responses to the set theoretical argument turn out to be surprisingly unhelpful here. Well, maybe it's semantic, maybe it's not set theoretic. Let's find out. A bit of vocab first. I follow fine 82 in calling an object with embodies some property a qua object. A qua object has both a form and a base. Following later fine, I'll denote a qua object with base A by form F by writing A/F. Simple hylomorphism is given by the following pair of principles. Existence, given a property F in an object A such that F of A, there's something B such that B is A/F. So it's the, I'm not sure what a base is yet, but okay. Uniqueness, for any property effing G and objects A, B, A/F equals B/G if A equals B and F is the same property as G. Existence reflects the aversion to arbitrariness and says that for any instantiated property, there is a qua object that embodies it. Uniqueness gives the individuation conditions for qua objects. The qua objects are the same just in case they have the same bases and embody the same property. This guarantees, among other things, that matter qua being statue-shaped and matter qua being lump-like are distinct, despite having the same material basis. Although uniqueness is suggested by the identity condition explicitly proposed in Fine 82 in 1999, something like it seems to be presupposed in most contemporary versions of hylomorphism. Given any property an object A, such as F of A, so like the cat is wearing a hat, there's something B such that B is AF, so the cat wearing the hat is B. Okay. For any property f and g, objects A, B, A is F and B is G, if and only A is B and F is the same property. So if the cat was wearing a hat and this other thing that is the same thing as the cat is also hat wearing, then F is the same property as G, and so those things are the same. Okay. The cat in the hat. I wonder if there's enough. I don't think I've ever read any philosophy that references the cat in the hat. I may have to do that just on principle. I mean, a nice parallel to a tortoise in the Achilles. The structure of the argument is analogous to the argument in Russell's paradox of sets and can be presented in 4 steps. There is a property n, which an object instantiates if and only if it embodies a property that it does not instantiate. Something m instantiates n. By 1 and 2 and existence, there is a qua object m/n. 3 is inconsistent with uniqueness. Okay, so there is a property n which instantiates if and only if it embodies a property that it does not instantiate. Yeah, so this is a little too comprehension-y right here. Okay. A liberal conception of properties gives us 1. Roughly according to the liberal conception, corresponding to any intelligible condition, there is a property had by exactly the thing that satisfies the condition. Although a defense of this background picture of properties is beyond the scope of the paper, I'll briefly revisit in section 2.1. We can argue for 2 in a number of ways, since all we need is a qua object A/F that doesn't instantiate F. One straightforward argument depends on the assumption that qua objects are distinct from their bases. Yeah, this is a good question. What is a qua object exactly, and what is a base exactly? So any qua object that embodies a property it had only by its base will satisfy 2. Schematically, if there's at least one object A, the liberal conception of properties guarantees that there is a property F had only by A. By existence, there is a qua object A/F, and if the distinctness assumption holds A/F isn't F because only A is F and A/F isn't A. Okay, so yeah, the thing that is F isn't just F because it has to have the property of being a thing also. There's some sort of weird anxiety going on here. Okay, whatever. How plausible is the distinctness assumption? Yeah, I'm not exactly sure what all of this is. The slash is doing in this stuff. Yeah. What is all of? And like, what is this right there? I don't know. Like a something f isn't f. Well, clearly not, because it's got a slash in between it. But it's like, So what exactly is going on with being a qua object? How plausible is the distinctness assumption? On the one hand, a large part of the initial appeal of simple hylomorphism is that in the paradigm puzzle cases, it allows us to accommodate the modal difference between an ordinary object and their matter by providing a framework capable of distinguishing them. So, for example, the hylomorphist can offer an especially attractive explanation of why matter qua being statue-shaped is more modally fragile than the matter itself. On the other hand, the most obvious cases with the right structure to support two, namely where a qua object embodies a property had only by its base, seem much more implausible. For example, if O and O qua being identical to O are distinct, then O being qua being identical to O embodies a property that it doesn't instantiate, since only O has that property. But O being identical to O doesn't seem to differ modally from O, so we lack our usual grounds for distinguishing a qua object from its base. Yeah, so it's sort of like the statue is like to be that lump to begin with. That's what the statue property is now. So you're going to define the statue in terms of being a lump, but then it's not. And then you're saying, well, it's not, you can't. But then if you're defined it as it has to be unique, then it's not unique because it's defined in terms of itself anyway. Okay. Happily for the argument above to work, we need only an object that is contingently the unique f. Given the plausibility that a/f exists only when a is f, then Michael is contingently God's uniquely favorite angel. Qua object Michael / being God's favorite angel is more mortally fragile than Michael himself, and thus plausibly distinct from Michael. So yeah, it's perhaps during the period that Michael being God's favorite angel, when Michael is God's favorite angel, is less general than just Michael the angel himself. Looking at the comprehension stuff. Michael being God's... Oh, did I miss something? And then Michael himself, and thus plausibly distinct from Michael. Michael being God's favorite angel doesn't enjoy the same exalted status as Michael, and so embodies a property that doesn't instantiate. Oh, okay, so this is just the property, Michael as being the property of instantiating God's favorite angel. But like Michael is the angel that is God's favorite, but this is sort of like the this is the qua object of being under this conception. Yeah, why would you do that? Okay, so they want to do that because of the hylomorphism, but yeah. More interestingly, we can justify 2 even without the distinctness assumption. This argument is slightly less straightforward, but requires nothing beyond the principles of simple hylomorphism. If there are at least 2 things A, B, the theory of properties guarantees that there is a property F had only by A, and the property G had only by A and B. By existence, there is A/F and A/G. By uniqueness, these are distinct. And in the absence of the distinctness assumption, we're free to identify either A/F or A/G with A, but we cannot identify both with A. Ultimately, we can show this however goes. There will still be something that fails to instantiate its own form, so there will be something that instantiates N. Where did N come from? Okay, but fair enough. If you are using these sort of like partial existence things, that's what the slash does, that only exists when the sort of the statue or that concept of the thing exists, then the concept of the thing only does not depend on the matter, but the concept at that point, the conceptual object, the statue, exists and has the distinctness, and so it does not just fall down to being the stuff itself. The next two steps of the argument follow immediately from 3. Just as an application of 3 is just an application of existence, call an object from 2M, since NM existence gives M/N. Step 4 of the argument is similarly straightforward and reminiscent of Russell's paradox. The qua object of M/N either instantiates N or it does not. Yeah. So you give it the qua thing of not being itself. If M/N doesn't instantiate N, there's some property that embodies which it does not instantiate, but this is just what it is for something to be N. So if M/N doesn't instantiate N, then M/N does instantiate N. If M/N doesn't instantiate N, then M/N must fail to instantiate some property that it embodies. By uniqueness, the only property M/N embodies is N. So if M/N instantiates N, then M/N doesn't instantiate N. So yeah, you've got too much comprehension on the forms given in these schemes. On pain of contradiction, we can't hold to the minimal package. It seems that the only two salient roots for responding to the puzzle. That there are only two salient roots for responding to the puzzle. Short of abandoning the liberal conception of properties, must either give up existence to block the construction of Russell's objection entirely, or surrender uniqueness. Both roots are parallel to Russell's paradox of sets, but as we'll see, some of the corresponding moves look much less plausible in this setting. Responses. Before exploring these two responses, I want to pause to head off the temptation to aim our attentions elsewhere. This argument relies on the liberal theory of properties assumed in the background. Yes, this is what guarantees that there is a property N that a qua object has, just in case it doesn't instantiate any property it embodies. Just in case it doesn't instantiate. Yeah, that's right. The important features of this view for our purposes is that it allows. Okay, I hope they caught this in the final. The important feature of this view for our purpose is that it allows, forget the is there, impredicative conditions to determine genuine properties, meaning roughly that we allow property-determining conditions to contain quantifiers ranging over properties or weaker conception of properties, for example, one that regards only predicative conditions as intelligible when guarantee N is a genuine property, and so arguments would never get off the ground. But weakening our otherwise consistent theory of properties in light of the problem for a simple hylomorphism would surely be an overreaction. For those who already take issue with the liberal conception of properties, the minimal theory may be safe. Intuitively, however, this argument doesn't show us that the property involved is somehow pathological. Instead, it seems to cast suspicion on the object that embodies the property. Something has gone wrong in the theory of embodiments, not in the theory of properties on which it relies. Okay. Weaken existence. We might say that although properties involved in the argument are genuine properties, they fall outside the scope of existence principle for qua objects. On this strategy, although properties are abundant, not all properties are intelligible as forms. Given an appropriate restricted alternative to existence, we could avoid Russell-like qua objects in namely M/N. Yeah, so you define yourself out of the problem. You have to say the thing already existed, like they do in set theory. But such a principle would have to be independently motivated, and we already have good reason to be suspicious of any such restriction. Yeah, if you want to make math work, you do it. But if you're going to do it in this area, then you'd have to have some other reason. Simple hylomorphism was initially attractive on the grounds that no satisfying non-arbitrary alternative to existence seemed available. Does this argument point us to any new candidates? We might hope that the analogy with Russell's paradox could help here. Probably not. We could hope that, though. For example, the lesson of the argument in the set theoretic setting is sometimes taken to be that some properties specify collections too large to be sets. Yeah, they do say that. I'm not sure about that. The analogous diagnosis here is that N is unsafe because it's too large, and so we should restrict the range of F in existence to small enough properties. But this is clearly hopeless. Such a restriction looks painfully ad hoc in the setting and renders the theory too weak to do its intended job. The existence of a statue shouldn't depend on the number of statue-shaped lumps of clay, and yet, given the size of the diagnosis, a world with too many statue-shaped lumps would be a world without statues. I mean, I don't know about this concept of existence, like, right there. That's a little weird, because, I mean, the set theoretic existences are, what it ranges over. In some sense, I don't think that there actually are that many things. Okay. Yeah. I mean, I think the point is right. I don't like exactly how it was argued for here, but whatever. Maybe this isn't the most promising connection for our purposes. Perhaps there are other ways of weakening the set theoretic analog of existence which will inspire less ad hoc alternatives. One of the most familiar responses to Russell's paradox is to embrace the iterative conception of sets. On the iterative conception, we think of a set being built in stages. At each stage of the cumulative hierarchy, we can only form new sets from the sets that have already been built at earlier stages. The analogous conception of the holomorphic domain is quite attractive. We begin with the mere matter, and all of the properties had by the mere matter are then built at our first stage of qua objects. From there, we can introduce second stage qua objects, which embody the properties had by those at the first stage, and so on. This amounts to the insistence that existence is restricted in two ways. The first way is reasonably intuitive. The alternative existence principle can only deliver qua objects that have lower stage objects at its basis. The more surprising restriction that comes with the iterative picture is that the one we actually require to avoid the argument. Qua objects can only embody properties that are instantiated only by lower stage objects. For example, the closest things to the Russell object we get on this picture is a level n qua object m that embodies the property of being an a level n-1 qua object that doesn't have the property embodies, but there is no contradiction m lacking that property. Yeah, that's a little bit of a weird thing. Again, what is plausible in the set theoretic case is too weak to be plausible here. The iterative conception of material objects seems to gut simple holomorphism of its explanatory power. Simple holomorphism is supposed to help us explain how, for example, the lump and its statue can have the property of being statue-shaped, but the latter and not the former embodies it. On the iterative conception, nothing can have the property it embodies, because it can only embody the lower stage properties. Yeah, again back to this being statue-shaped. Seems like maybe the target of the form here is a little funky. It's like when we're making statues, we're not making statues out of Russell paradox stuff. So it's like somehow maybe there's a conceptual way out of this that is not that is completely separate. Anywho, it seems that the connection to set theoretic cases don't suggest any adequate non-arbitrary alternative to existence. More radical response is to regard the argument as forcing arbitrariness upon us. This is where Fine 2007 lands, albeit for very different reasons. He argues that for some domains, including the domain of the material, what exists may inevitably be an arbitrary matter. Fine suggests that this is because embodiments might not be subject to a general existence axiom at all. After all, which embodiments there are might depend instead on which objects we, through human activity, introduce and recognize. Yeah, that's kind of what I was just saying. It might be something outside of this realm that is really what's why things are statues. If we are comfortable with this kind of relativity, then there may be room to overcome our commitment to anti-arbitrariness and accept some restriction to existence. Still, it would be surprising, I think, to find that arbitrariness or relativity in material objects ontology is inevitable on pain of inconsistency. Well, see, this is interesting. It would be surprising, I think, to find that arbitrariness or relativity in material objects is inevitable on pain of inconsistency. It's not. That's the whole problem. This problem is this is the result of a problem, not the not where the underlying cause of it. There's the point of the other stuff is what was said above, and what I'm saying is that there might be some other cause. It's showing up as an inconsistency, and that may not be the root cause. So this is like saying, well, treating a symptom, not the disease. I mean, it's like treating someone has like a fever and you're trying to give them Tylenol when they have coronavirus and they're dying on, and you're like, well, I'm fixing the problem. I don't understand why they're not alive. Anyway, the credentials of the idea that admitting arbitrariness should be a last resort are strong. Thankfully, we haven't yet been brought to our last resort. Good. Well, we'll find out where we go. But yeah, it's like I feel like Duchamp would know what to say here. The second reaction to the puzzle is to abandon uniqueness and leave existence untouched. Although this route may seem initially unpromising, my aim in this section is to suggest that for the hylomorphist who is reluctant to give up existence, it is worth taking seriously. But how weak would an adequate restriction of uniqueness have to be? In section 1, we appeal to uniqueness where in fact we might have appealed to something much weaker. Consider the following apparent innocuous consequence of uniqueness, extinction. For any f and g, if a is this qua object bearing f and b is equal to some b object qua object bearing g, then for all c, f c if and only if g of c. So for two things being equal, then if there's some third, then it has both properties. We can rerun the argument in defense of step 4 using only extinction. We only need to appeal to uniqueness once, but showing that if m/n instantiates n, then m/n doesn't instantiate n. We only need to appeal to uniqueness once and showing the contradiction. Briefly, that argument can now go as follows. If m/n instantiates n, then by the definition of n, there is some property y, and some property g such that m/n is equal to y/g, and m/n doesn't instantiate g. But then by extension, g and n must be coextensive. So if m/n doesn't instantiate g, m/n doesn't instantiate n. Thus, it won't do us any good to abandon uniqueness unless our alternative permits counterexamples to extinction. Although it isn't easy to see how we could come to terms with such a permissive individuation conditions, it doesn't seem that the loss of uniqueness and with it extinction would be much of an impairment to the hylomorphic picture. Our grounds for accepting these principles in the first place were already shaky. We've seen that a viable hylomorphic response to the puzzles of material constitution must be able to accommodate the distinctions we were led to by putative applications of Leibniz law, and so we'll have as a consequence that reality is in some fine sense more fine-grained than it looks. However, that isn't yet a positive motivation for uniqueness itself. We have no reason to expect that the fineness of grain required to deliver a satisfying answer to the target puzzles must be quite so extreme. Okay, so you're saying there's some third thing here, and the third thing, okay, so you're generating the hierarchy is what this is really doing. And so like for everything there's some third thing, and then that third thing is not appealing to the previous thing, and so you're always going to the next level, and that's what's keeping you from getting into yourself in trouble. Full-fledged uniqueness is ripe with unsettling consequences that haven't gone unnoticed, even by those who take it as their starting point. For example, Fine 1999 points out that in the plural extension of the hylomorphic theory, given two stacked twin blocks A and B, we shouldn't distinguish the tower B being on top of block B, A being beneath, because to do so would to cut things too finely. Instead, he proposes an alternative individuation condition, according to which embodiments are just the same. In the case, the state of A, B standing in the relation R is the same as the state of A prime, B prime standing in the relation R prime. The intuitive idea here, I take it, is that although the relations come apart, what they require of the objects that embody them is the same. So yeah, you can swap things around if you swap around all the relations, and that gives you some new thing that is not the same as the last thing, but it fails in uniqueness. Okay. In general, failures of uniqueness can be made palatable by reflecting on the difference between embodying and merely instantiating a property. Okay, yeah, because you're doing something slightly more than instantiating. When an object embodies a property, we say that the object is shaped, structured, or qualified by that property, or again from Fine, we might think of the form F in the matter form combination M/F as a kind of mold to which the matter M is meant to conform. I want to suggest that where uniqueness fails are cases where distinct properties nonetheless impose the same mold on objects that embody them. An individuation condition that appropriately respects the hylomorphic conception of embodiment should allow these cases. On this way of thinking, the initial argument is just more evidence that uniqueness is too strong. Okay. Yeah, so if you're saying it embodies so you're trying to pull apart the self-reference here by saying there is no uniqueness, so it can't sort of reference itself. The only lingering concern is that this route will run afoul of the arbitrariness constraint, but that risk is less pressing here. Abandoning uniqueness doesn't compel us draw any arbitrary lines. Properties are all on par with respect to the theory in that they are all eligible as forms. We don't have to take a stand on when properties are embodied, since there aren't any cases where an instantiated property fails to be an embodying by cases where an instantiated property fails to be embodied by anything. Rejecting uniqueness simply allows for that certain properties' differences in extension may not always correspond to a difference in what is required of an object that embodies them. Whether there is a difference between something embodying this property and that one may unsurprisingly be sensitive to the base end property in question. Okay. Conclusion. Of course, this discussion is far from conclusive. The second route leaves many questions unanswered. Exactly how widespread are failures of uniqueness? That's a good question to ask. Is there any general principle of individuation capable of replacing it, or are we bound to proceed by cases? These questions all merit further investigation, but are better with a more developed version of hylomorphism in hand. Nor do I take myself to have shown that the second route is conclusively preferable to the first. My goal here was more modest. I hope to show that, having noted the inconsistency of hylomorphism, there is space to amend the theory without giving up antecedent commitments to avoiding arbitrariness. Whichever way we turn, the tension between avoiding arbitrariness and maintaining a fine-grained conception of material objects is an interesting one and presents an unexplored choice for contemporary defenders of hylomorphism. Okay, that was interesting. Yeah, if you're gonna, it's like showing that the paradoxes, the set theoretic paradox pops up in hylomorphism. This is sort of it feels actually this is somewhere in between the semantic paradoxes too. So although it's clearly made in terms of the set theoretic ones, and that makes it clear, I feel like you could have done something more like the liar paradox, where the liar has to refer to itself, but then there's arguments where, well, you're not really referring to itself, you're referring to some previous statement that isn't really itself, and I feel like that's what's going on in this one. You're not referring to the unique liar paradox, you're referring to some sort of schematic liar when you say, I'm lying to you right now, and that causes a problem, because you can't sort of like, you're referring to something back in time, something slightly different, some prior statement, and then whatever you're saying now does not apply, or how does that one work? So this is interesting because you're denying the uniqueness of the thing. You're denying that the target of the form is the same target, because the qua object, the form of the thing that is particularly embodying that hylomorphic instance, or that embodies it, is not entirely unique. So if it's not entirely unique, every time it's always in some sense in the world embodied, changing when it has the property of not being itself. Well, it never was itself, so it's sort of, it makes it into a non-normal conception of how we think about things. But if they want to go that way in terms of protecting themselves from the paradox, this has theoretical company basically. This is a way to go, and probably I like this paper. I mean, this is not. I don't think I'm particularly hylomorphic at the moment, but I mean, you're translating the paradox into a different area, and I very much appreciate that. So this is get a thumbs up in terms of argumentative strategy from me. It took me a minute to figure out what was going on. So, okay. Good paper. Hope to get back to more papers. Let's see, it's getting a little bit late and I start to lose my mind, but I might do more today. But hopefully more tomorrow. I think I scheduled it for 10 a.m. tomorrow or 10:30 or something. And So 10:30 again, and hopefully see you tomorrow. Have a good night. Stay safe, folks. Bye.